Workplace Champions is made possible by Workday. Hello and welcome to Workplace Champions. This episode will be featuring the workforce insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including CFO Claire Bromley of Teradata, CFO Rajesh Gupta of Oak North Bank, and CFO Mark George of Norfolk Southern. And once more, we're pleased to feature performance management guru Brett Knowles as our resident thought leader as we together seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of workplace champions. Brett Knowles joins us after this. In a world that's always changing, one thing never does: your need to adapt, your need to evolve, your need to grow. That's why we built Workday, a single finance, HR, and planning system that can change as your needs change and evolve as the world evolves. To learn how Workday is helping mid-size organizations embrace the future with confidence, visit us at workday.com. Hello, everyone. We are recording this at around 9 Eastern Time, and I'm based here in New York, and Brett Knowles has been out and about, so I always do my best to catch up with him at no matter what the time. We'll have to timestamp this episode, though, or I'm about to, by mentioning the Queen of England passed earlier today, Elizabeth II. Brett, being a Canadian with the Queen on your money, I just thought it might be an interesting place to open. What do you make of this moment in history? And I do think it's historic. I have to say, there's been a lot of trite blabber, but with the talking heads and what have you. But there's no mistaking that this is an important moment in history.
Well, no, it's interesting because as I reflect, I find that I feel quite sad. And of course, I've never met the young lady, but, um, for what she represents and what has happened in her life, like there's probably no one who's lived such an incredible experience as she did. And, if you think, back when she was a young lady, we had cars that could, barely go 5 miles without breaking down. And, through a war, everything that's happened up to where we are now, I'm not sure mankind has ever had such a huge transition in culture, mindset, values. There's been more change in this, century than there was in probably in the preceding 20 centuries. I don't know what the number is, but and she has been able to maintain integrity, maintain a state of stability. There's nothing about her that was ever tainted, that would ever go, gosh, that's like really awkward or funny. And that in itself is amazing to be through that amount of transition, to have stayed above the riffraff. And yeah, there's been a whole bunch of things that happened, and we've all enjoyed watching the Netflix shows that have showed how adaptive and agile that monarchy was about those changes. And yeah, to begin with, there was a lot of resistance, but you could see the ever increasing ability to roll with the waves and keep moving forward. And think of all the other monarchs that failed in the same period of time, that weren't able to evolve. So it's sad, not because I knew the person, it's sad because it's such a great example of how we can all survive in complex, stressful environments and adapt and be agile when an argument could be made that you didn't need to.
Now, you mentioned stressful times, and I think when you said that, of course, I think many of us thought of the pandemic and all the disruption and stress, really, that it's caused over a period of years. But this is just one era or chapter that she's reigned over. And Interestingly, when Philip, her husband, dies last year, that was something that may have signaled the end is near. But no, we had not come out the other side of the pandemic, and you get the sense that Elizabeth wasn't going to leave until she felt it had ended. Same thing, really, with the British government when she, just days ago, greets the new prime minister, as she's done with so many others. It kind of reveals how it was always more about beginnings than endings with her.
And I'm partly sad for what happens next, because how could anyone ever top that? Because the monarchy's political impact, of course, has been just eroded century on century. And we all know it's uh, an image thing at that point in time. At this point in time, but it's still like any other brand. It's something that you can relate to and feel um, an element of. Everyone in the UK feels an element of the monarchy. Not necessarily everyone feels an element of the Nike brand or the Starbucks brand, but everyone feels an element of the monarchy. It is one of those instances that is non-repeatable. That person's existence and that movement of the monarchy could never happen again. And so this is an interesting moment in time that we can all now say, what were you doing when you heard the Queen passed?
Well, I think we've given Elizabeth II her due. And before our listeners suspect they keyed up the wrong podcast, let us advance into the workplace champions realm. And I'm going to begin with a article from the headlines, something we've been hearing a good deal about lately, the concept of quiet quitting. Brett, I want to hear your thoughts on this notion of quiet quitting. Now, this is from the BBC site. Quiet quitting, the workplace trend taking over TikTok. It begins as the world of work has experienced a drastic change since the pandemic. The change in workplace culture has resulted in a mindset that is currently dominating social media. Quiet quitting. Despite the name, it actually has nothing to do with quitting your job. It means doing only what your job demands and nothing more. Quitting doing anything extra. You still show up for work, but stay strictly within the boundaries of your job requirements. So, no more helping out with additional tasks or checking emails outside of your work hours. And on the explanation goes. But, Brett, tell us, what do you make of quiet quitting?
I would say that it is completely consistent with what you and I have been talking about for the last 8 months. Whether you call it the Great Resignation or quiet quitting, they're cute phrases around the same issue, and that is it's about engaging employees and capturing their creativity and their energy in the work that they do. And maybe the standards are higher. I'm not sure. You and I have talked about the millennials and all those expectations, and they're the same expectations that we had when we were their age. We just didn't have the rights to ask for them. But we all didn't want just an annual performance review. We all didn't want, the pressures that we all experienced. But that's what we were given, and we smiled and took it. Whereas now people are asking for the same things that, again, we would have liked to have had, but we didn't have the wherewithal to ask for. So the quiet quitting, we've all known people who've closed their laptops at 5 or who haven't uh, worked as hard as others. I worked for one company as a client. One of my clients was a public sector organization that I won't name. And the standing joke there was, why did the employee not look out the window in the morning? And of course, the answer was, so they had something to do in the afternoon. So different tempos of work have existed. I think there's something that COVID has offered that we should learn from, but this isn't one of them.
Okay, well, just to torment you, I'm going to just dwell a little more on this. I have an audio clip I'd like to share. The article pointed out that how there's a lot of commentary out there regarding quiet quitting on TikTok and other media sites, I went ahead and found um, one of the sharks from Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, commenting on quiet quitting. Brett, do you know Kevin?
Kevin lives about 2 miles from, 3 kilometers from me.
Really?
Really? He's Canadian, eh?
I don't know that he is.
He is absolutely Canadian.
Okay, well, you can keep him. He's not my favorite shark, really. So, but here, let me play you the clip, and then you can share your thoughts regarding what your Canadian neighbor shares.
The economy's changing. Obviously, we're going into a whole new metric where some people work at home, some people work at distance, some people go back to the office. We don't know how it's going to shape out in the long run. It's more project-based. In other words, you're hired and you're trusted to finish things off. Really, it's about culture. You know, I'm an investor in small business in America, 50 to 500 million. That is 65% of our economy. These are family businesses. You build a culture. When you bring somebody in that slams shut their laptop at 5 o'clock, you're introducing a cancer into your culture. Eventually, you're going to have to do surgery and cut it out. The whole idea would be avoid these people. I don't know where this started. It's the worst idea I've ever heard because it's against what we do in business. We try and build teams that work together to achieve something, set objectives, and work together. It doesn't matter whether you're working anymore at 6 a.m. or 2 in the morning. You're just getting your job done. That's the freedom the economy's giving you now on a distance basis. Nobody's asking you to work 9 to 5. They're asking you to get your job done. If you walk in your interview and say, I only work from 9 to 5 and then I stop working, I can't wait to get you into my competitor. Help me find these people. This is like a virus. This is worse than COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Wonderful. So, what did you make, Brett, of what was shared?
What the interesting thing that O'Leary added that I think is worthwhile is it's more about the outcome. Did you achieve what your job needed to do? Not did you put in the hours. So the old banker's hours and the Wall Street of FaceTime are a thing of the past. That's something that's relatively new. I think the shock that COVID has given the economy, the unexpected but very positive consequence is it forced us to figure out how to work from home, and that recognizing that working from home allowed us to create those same outputs. So it has changed forever how work gets done. As O'Leary said, I don't care whether you get the work done at 2 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock or 6 o'clock at night. What matters is, did you achieve the key result that linked to your objective? You see how I sort of stuck in the OKR thing? But the issue is, that's how we're leading the world. It's all about what are your objectives? What are the key results? If you achieve them, I don't care whether you did it in 4 hours or 40 hours. That's what I'm looking for. Back when I had hair, we used to worry about, did you put in your 60 hours a week? It was all about FaceTime. It didn't matter if you're only productive for 5, so long as you're there for 60.
Before we go a minute further, Brett, I wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind. Again, you have previewed our workplace champions, so you know what we have in store. I'm wondering if you found any commonalities or interesting themes that the three workplace champions highlight this episode. What should we expect?
So I think the theme this week is all about understanding what is the value proposition that your organization offers employees. And that sounds super weird to say that you actually have to sell your business to employees, but that's it. What is the value prop? No different than what's your value prop in selling your product. What's your value prop in selling your company to attract the best talent? And each of our speakers gives us a different perspective on what they've done to help attract human capital to their organizations.
Well, permit me to tee up our first workplace champion, who is CFO Claire Bromley of Teradata. CFO Bromley climbed the finance career ladder at HP from lowly manager of finance into the global controller position before joining Teradata in the midst of the pandemic back in 2021 as CFO. We touched on multiple things, but clearly talent is something that Claire has a passion for. Here is CFO Claire Bromley.
I see it as a necessity, honestly. The people are everything to me as a leader. I do not believe that should be a one-man show, one-woman show. So I genuinely feel the power of the team, that anything is possible. And I talk about this a lot. Together, when we're all moving forward together, anything is possible. And I don't think that's the case if it's just one individual. So yes, I think talent is a necessity. I think it has been a very interesting environment, actually, with regards to availability of talent and just the people moving. I mean, I moved in the pandemic to a new role, so there's been a lot of changes happening. But I think people, what they're looking for these days is slightly different. Like I said, one of the things I was focused on when I moved was very much about the culture of the company. Obviously, the role was very attractive, but if it wasn't the right company and the right leadership team, then I think that would have definitely stopped me from moving to Teradata. And I think lots of people have been reflecting in the last couple of years, who do I want to work for? Both as a leader standpoint, but also as a company. And I think things like culture, diversity and inclusion, focus on ESG, that's something I spend a lot of time talking about internally, externally. All of those things I think are really important. And what Teradata did actually during the pandemic, which I think has made a big difference, we've gone fully flexible. So Teradata are saying you can work wherever you want. You do not have to come into an office a certain number of days a week. And I think what we found is that's very attractive to people. People have got used to that flexibility and wanting to be able to work wherever they are and being able to kind of be flexible between home and work life. Now that has advantages and disadvantages, as we all know, especially with young kids. But yeah, I mean, that flexibility and Teradata took that stance pretty early on, and we have seen a great attraction of talent. It's definitely, I think, worked in our favor, and people see the culture, see the flexibility that we provide, see that inclusion focus. And they want to work for a company like Teradata. Well, one of the advantages of working for a data and analytics company is we have a lot of data and a lot of analytics available to us. So internally, we all have, as leaders, and I have access to the whole company as well, a dashboard that's updated every day that tells me what does the attrition look like on a rolling basis, on in a particular week or a particular month or quarter. And not only can I see what the numbers look like, I can see how many people have left who are potentially diverse, how many people we're hiring, are we moving in the right direction, where are they located? I mean, we have all of that information, and we have quarterly reviews on our organizational health to make sure that we're looking at that. So yes, this is something that we have been paying close attention to.
Well, I wouldn't doubt a number of our listeners have dashboard envy. Sounds like Teradata has something there that's state of the art. But Brett, what were some of your takeaways from what you just heard?
Well, it was intriguing because, obviously she's people-centric and it's all about the team and talent. I liked some of the comments that she made about availability, but what I really liked is that they were looking for different attributes in their team members than they were before. And attributes like, being culture-centric, about their interest and desire on a path that took them to leadership. And so it was a different path. And then she suddenly went sideways and said, well, it's really funny that it's really important that people spend time to reflect on themselves and that they understand that being flexible in how you work and where you work becomes a key attribute for success. And she thought that was helping them attract more people because they offered that, work from home, work at the office, flex that you see. What interested me is I would suggest that's no longer a differentiator. That in smaller companies, they've been doing that since COVID hit. And that's the reason smaller organizations are not having difficulty attracting people. And I'm glad to see that larger organizations, it's finally dawning on them that that's no longer a differentiator. It's just a necessity. If you don't offer that, it's like, not offering daycare or not offering, paternity leave. You're just not going to get anyone replying to your help wanted ads.
So she emphasized nicely, I think, how sort of the mindset of the employee has changed in terms of thinking about where do I want to work? What type of company or organization do I want to be part of? Now, arguably, it's not something we haven't heard before, really.
So it might be that large corporations are finally realizing this, but the small companies that have been grappling to get employees have figured this stuff out a year ago. This is not new. The part that she added that was new was the fact that they've begun to build this employee dashboard where they look at the metrics literally daily. That part was new. So in the smaller companies, we don't see that. They don't have the analytics. They wander around the hallways or, it's who shows up in the Zoom meetings kind of thing, where she's saying that, they are looking literally daily at what's happening in terms of their hiring trends, the unintended employee departures, a whole bunch of information. In the old days, the CFO would be looking at stock numbers daily or inventory numbers daily or free cash flow. The fact that she's talked about and has built in an employee dashboard, that's the interesting part that Claire brought to the table.
Who is Rajesh Gupta, CFO of Oak North Bank out of the United Kingdom. Rajesh was a GE Capital executive. Somewhere, I think, close to 10, 15 years he invested with GE. He was very involved in restructurings and M&A activity there, which often involve financial institutions and different types of offerings that were being integrated into the larger mothership. In any case, as CFO of Oak North Bank, talent has become top of mind. Here is Rajesh.
Yeah, I think for me, when we talk about talent, I'll probably talk as much about talent within the company because they are impacted by that economic environment, right? Because they can walk if they wanted to, but also the new people we bring in. From my vantage point, there's quite a few things that I look at. The first and most important thing was just like it was for me. I want to make sure that the people who are in the company, the talent who is in the company, and the people we are bringing in, these are people who actually believe in the mission of the company and they believe in the values of the company. Because I do absolutely believe that if people agree with the mission, people align to the values that the company has, then it is a lot easier for them to be successful in the company and the company to be successful. So that I think is incredibly critical, especially in our case. The value system is very strong. Customer delight is at the center of everything we do. We like to operate as one team, and I have seen less bureaucracy between functions here than I have in pretty much any other place. There's the concept of both ambition and caution in what we do, almost both going. It's not one or the other, it is one and the other. And then momentum, and we are quite comfortable zero basing. So if something's not working, we can very comfortable, we don't spend time defending it. We take it, we throw it out, and we restart and think about it from a perspective. So that I think is very critical from an individual perspective. The second thing for me is technical skills, right? There's no sense having people in roles where they are here 100% to learn. They need to bring a core skill of technical skills, especially in the kind of companies we work. There may be a technical accountant, there may be an analyst, there may be a programmer, they can probably do data analytics, whatever it is, they need to come with a core set of technical skills. They have to have the execution skills to show that they can translate their technical capability into impact within the business. And the last two things for me, one is attitude. I would probably hire for attitude over technical skills 9 out of 10 times. There has to be a baseline technical skill, but for me, attitude trumps that. Without attitude, technical skills are of no use. And then finally, diversity. Everyone talks about diversity and everyone has their own diversity. For me, it's diversity of experience, because especially when you run a finance function and you're running it in a company where we have ideas coming out, it is great to have a bunch of people with different experiences gathered in different places around the table, so that when something comes up, they can say, I've heard about that somewhere. So when I look at my leadership team around, they've come from all sorts of places. They have had all sorts of experiences. And that diversity I feel very proud of.
What do you think? Is there something enlightening here? I thought there were a couple of interesting items that he shared. What would you tell us?
It wasn't more enlightening. It was just taking another step in the journey. And his step was all about, and I thought it was interesting, right? Because he started off saying, well, when we hire, we have to focus on mission and vision, and you have to focus on technical skills. And I was nodding off at that point. It's like, yeah. And then he adds in, but what's more important actually is attitude. So even though he mentioned it as third, he says the most important aspect is what is the attitude someone has. In fact, he goes, I'd rather hire someone with lower technical skills that has the attitude that we're looking for. And I thought that was interesting based on where his conversation had begun. And I'm not sure how he framed his thinking. It's merely interesting that he did that cute turn at the third point was the most important. But then he built on that, which I thought was even more interesting. He said, and finally, and perhaps even more important, is I'm worried about diversity. And there's this interesting pause. And then he goes, diversity of experience. So, and you talk about his background being GE, Ukraine, digital banking. And it's just that. It's the diversity of experience that you bring to the table, not the cultural diversity. And the cultural diversity is interesting, but it's somewhat two-dimensional. Like, unfortunately, once you start off in that cultural channel, you're kind of there. So I need multiple people. What he's saying is inside that one individual, I can have diversity itself. I can have diversity of experience in what they've done. And so what he's saying is my primary attractors are people that had a very diverse background. Secondly, people with the right attitude. Thirdly, people that buy into the mission and values. And fourthly, the criteria that used to be number one 2 decades ago is what are their technical skills. So he's literally turned the hiring platform on its head.
It just as you pointed out, when he talked about attitude, it just eclipsed everything he had said before it, and yet he had it sort of third in line. But it was clear it just came to him, and it was sort of like a revelation he's probably had a few times, and he's like, oh, wait a minute.
I don't think it was a revelation. I think it was the opposite. Is his British background, I would call it a GBO, a glimpse of the bloody obvious. Like, it's so obvious you have to have the attitude and the diversity. It's not even worth mentioning. Right. No. What he thought was worth mentioning was, stuff that was like values and technical skills, which is interesting because the other stuff is just so ingrained in his mindset that, it's just there. And then he sort of said, oh, by the way, I forgot about these foundational stones. So I thought that was interesting. He didn't tell us, what that meant in terms of what the hiring process looked like, or how we reviewed resumes, how we interviewed people. It'd be intriguing to sort of dig into that in more detail. But it's interesting that, and we've seen this elsewhere. I've done lots of work in the military, and in the military, you end up without a career. You end up with 10 4-year careers. So they put you in one area for 4 years, then another area for 4 years, another area for 4 years. And by the time you're about 40 or 50, you finally have the breadth of experience and skill set to begin moving up the organization. And that's his diversity of experience model of, let's bring in all that experience. We see that when we work in organizations, that if you think of a team, when you get a team together to have a conversation, what you're really trying to do is get the wisdom of all those brains. If I didn't need all those brains, I wouldn't invite them. So I'm trying to get people in the room with a whole bunch of different ideas. Now, if I had 10 people, in theory, I got 10 ideas. In Rajesh's model, if I have 10 people, I have 30 ideas, because each one has this diverse background that they're bringing in, and you get a much more robust conversation going on.
Is Mark George, CFO of Norfolk Southern Railway Corporation. Mark climbed the finance ranks at United Technologies, where he served in multiple CFO business unit roles, including he was CFO of Otis Elevator. He would join Norfolk Southern back in 2019. Here is CFO Mark George.
We are having virtually daily conversations with our HR folks in terms of our recruiting efforts, because we have 95 different hiring locations in our territory, which again is east of the Mississippi. So each one of those locations have to be appropriately staffed. If you have one or two locations that are short, it impacts the entire network. So you've got to get all 95 staffed up appropriately, because people are certified to operate in the radius around their hiring location. They can't, we don't move, it's unlike pilots where they can fly all over the US. You are certified to operate a train in only your certain geography where you're based. So we got to make sure that we're hiring in 95 locations. And we've got, call it a dozen or so that are particularly stressed with very low unemployment rates. So we're having daily conversations with our HR people and brainstorming what can we do to ramp up our recruiting efforts. We're going to trade schools, we're going back to the high schools. To be perfectly honest, we've got all sorts of referral programs in place internally. Phone a friend. We're using all of our workforce to help recruit people personally instead of just relying on our HR recruiting. In fact, I personally recruited an Uber driver just about a month ago. So he's now going through our training program. And so all hands are on deck right now trying to find employees to come on board and join this really great industry, because it really does, it's a very fulfilling industry to work in because of the noble mission we have. We're moving America's economy, and we're a great sustainable solution in doing that. What's interesting with our business when we look at our people, because it is a people business, we need people to move the trains. And when you don't have enough people, you can't move the trains, everything starts to fall apart. Well, what we found is that we can sometimes have the people, but the people aren't always available to work. They might mark themselves off as unavailable because many of our folks, they're on call. When we need them to move a train, we call them and they need to show up within 2 hours. So oftentimes people just will mark themselves off as unavailable, and that kind of really messes things up. So we've started to shift. Instead of looking at the gross number of people, we're looking at the percentage available on any given day. And how do we manage around that? How do we increase availability would be one example. So we've started to offer availability bonuses to try to incentivize people to make themselves more available, meaning don't mark yourself off as unavailable to go to a kid's sports event. If you'll get compensated extra by making yourself available. those are some of the things that we're doing and we're focusing. And then sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal, that you got to look at things a little bit different. So I won't personally take credit for that, but I'll just tell you that that's an area of nuance where we've discovered throughout all of this. It's not just a raw number of people, but it's the available number. And you can probably find similar learnings from that in other areas as well.
First off, who would have thought that business was so complicated, right? He was talking about 95 staffing locations and people are certified by location. Like, I don't understand it. Would have loved to know more about that, but I would have thought a train's a train, and if you knew how to run a train, anyways, but clearly that's the case. And
Got to be legacy regulatory issues, no? Something from the past where they kind of, I don't know, municipalities have their
I,
own rules. I don't
as
know.
I said, I'd love to double click on it and learn what it was, but it is what it is. So you end up with a company that you'd think is straightforward, and he ends up with a whole bunch of complexity around the hiring thing. And the need for that sort of staffing creativity is the word, right? He tells a story about hiring up an Uber driver and he's pulled them in. So that's all interesting. It's stuff that you go, gosh, I wish I knew more. And obviously, it's a people-centric business, right? The trains don't drive themselves. The thing that he began to talk about, which I thought was interesting, and is a different version of what we heard from other speakers today, and that is, he's looking at their availability. And he was talking about stories about, I know you want to go see your kid's soccer game, but if you could make yourself available, so if something happened, you could run off and join us, I'll pay you just for that availability, as opposed to utilization. And that reflects back on even right the first stuff that Claire was talking about, which is or even what Kevin was talking about, or Larry in the video at the beginning, which is it's all about the outcomes. If you achieve the outcomes, you don't have to be there for 8 hours. And in this case, the outcome may or may not be getting the train from point A to point B. The outcome is being available to help the train to go from point A to point B. In other words, I'll pay for your availability, not your utilization. So it's another example of a different employer model that I think is going to become more prevalent. So what does that look like? With Kevin O'Leary's model is I'm going to pay you for the outcome. And if the way that you work, Jack, you can get the outcome in 6 hours, yay. And Brett, the way you work, if it takes you 8 hours, also yay. You get the same amount, whether it took you 6 hours or 8 hours. I'm looking for the outcome. And if someone else could go in 2 hours, yay. But you get the same money, but you've now got more spare time. What Mark's talking about is a version of that, which is about availability. I'm not worried about and paying you by mile that you're in the train, but by hour that you're available to the company if and when we need you. So what I've noticed is I'm just getting run ragged these days because of COVID and therefore Zoom and work from home, clients in Asia find they can get access to me. Clients in Europe can get access to me. And those ones in North America too. Now, there's no time zone in which I don't need to be available. Now, it's a complex choice of priorities about how you choose the work you can go do. And am I going to choose it by location, time zone, industry, something like that? It's a very different set of choices than our parents had. And the work environment is very different, whether I go for Mark George's model of being paid for availability or Rajesh's model of, my experience and attitude, or even Claire's model of just enjoying the ability to be at home or work from the office. Like the contract between the employer and the employee is world of magnitude different in the last 3 years. There's been a wave moving this direction, things like what the millennials want and so on. But with the forcing function of COVID, all of a sudden the options are very different on both sides of the equation.
I want to give an example of Brett Knowles's savvy rapport with his email traffic. At the end of his emails, it says, "My working day may not be your working day. Please do not feel obligated to reply to this email outside of your normal working hours." In other words, he's not saying, "Hey, I'm not available right now, so I can't get back to you." He's letting his clients or customers know that, hey, please do not feel obligated to reply. Anyway, I think it's
Well,
very diplomatic and
well, no, but
very
it's actually the other side of that coin. Because I find myself up at 2 o'clock because I'm talking to someone in Asia, and something comes to mind about a client in North America. So I pound them off an email at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they feel obligated to respond to it. Just because my working hours are different than yours doesn't mean.
They're like, "Oh my gosh, Brett just replied. I have to reply back." Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we feel, I mean, it's a great point to bring up that it's a different contract between employer and employee. Like, and we haven't yet figured out what this new dance looks like. And so people think they should be responding to that email because it showed up in their in basket. And I'm saying to you, that's like so 3 years ago. This is not what should happen. You define your working hours. If you choose to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and look at emails, yay for you. But I shouldn't feel obligated to do the same thing because that's what you do. Now, there's a certain contract that has to happen where I need to make my expectations clear, you make yours clear, we're all good. But it's no longer 9 to 5 because I don't even know what time zone 9 to 5 is these days. Now, and I know my life is different than your life, but my life overlaps with yours. And you also have listeners who are in Asia and in Europe. And they're also going to send you messages at all times of the day and night. And we need to find that new contract. I have to put that byline because people don't understand it's a different contract. And I don't expect you to get back to me.
Well, this evening, I think we're only a time zone away. Where you had showed me with your laptop camera earlier, there's a river or a lake that you're looking out on, and you're here in the States, actually. You're not in the home country.
You know, that's the great river that divides the US and Canada. That's Canada over there, right? And that's the bridge that us Canadians go on. Oh, look, there's all the trucks waiting on there. That's like a whole bunch of GDP waiting in inventory. Yeah, there's a number of bridges across the Great Lakes between our two great countries. And three of them, this one, the one at Detroit, and the one at Buffalo, collectively transport more GDP than like 80% of the world. So it's like these little tiny arteries that feed both nations back and forth.
So before we go, let us know where you're headed. What's how's the OKR realm doing, and where are we headed?
So where am I going to? Everywhere right now. Like you talk about OKRs, and you know I've put so far this year. I got the number the other day, 175,000 miles on. So the equivalent of being around the world about 4 times. As leadership is trying to grapple with the issues that we've been talking about, and it's everywhere. My recent travels have been more in North America because I think right now we're either have a huge bigger need or huge bigger recognition that these techniques that the financial leadership team leads are having a bigger impact. So there's just a lot of movement in your listenership about leveling up how they manage their businesses.
Well, with that, I'm afraid we have to leave you.
Great. I'll try to find another interesting view to show you next time.
That would be nice. Thank you.
God knows where I'll be.
Yes, she does. For Workplace Champions, this is Brett Knowles and Jack Sweeney. Thank you for listening.
Hi, it's Jack. If you haven't yet subscribed to Workplace Champions, you'll find us on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend. Thanks for listening to Workplace Champions, a CFO Thought Leader production.